Good morning. Wait a minute, I think I only heard from 5 people. So, good morning. Thank you so much. Listen, good morning, goodbye, hello are all call and response. And so anytime I'm in a room, I make sure I do it. We should do it in our neighborhoods. We should do it when we're on the street because it can change the entire day of a person. A couple housekeeping rules. I like to have fun. This is a serious topic, but I'm going to rib you to have a little fun with us today. Also, just for the sake, because we're recording this, I have a stalker who watches everything we record and is online. Sometimes I get emails from this person critiquing. Mom, I totally got permission from Lonnie and the rest of the ladies to call them by their first name. So I want to make sure that that's on record because my mother will watch and I don't want to email afterwards. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm excited to be here to talk about this topic because this is work I get to do every day. I am the executive director of Weave, the Social Fabric Project at the Aspen Institute. And at Weave, we believe the health of our communities and our nation really depends on something simple, powerful, and deeply human. It's the way we show up for one another. We support everyday people around the country who are weaving stronger social ties through acts of care, connection, and trust building. Often unnoticed, but profoundly impactful. These weavers remind us that belonging doesn't come from our programs or our policies, it comes from our relationships. Today we're here to talk about one of the most essential ingredients in those relationships. It's compassion. The 2025 Compassion Report, released by the Muhammad Ali Center, reminds us that while Americans still value compassion deeply, many feel it slipping away from our culture. And in a time when loneliness and isolations are reaching crisis levels, not reaching, it's already there, that matters not just emotionally, but physically and socially. Compassion isn't a feeling, it's a skill, one we can practice, one we can model, and one that creates real healing, whether it's through eye contact, saying good morning, active listening, a small gesture in person, or yes, even through technology. This panel will explore how we can cultivate this skill and how we can transform individuals in our community. I am honored to be joined today by 3 really powerful women. I don't often feel like I'm not important, but I don't feel important today because I'm surrounded by these 3, right? Lonnie Ali, a philanthropist, advocate, and co-founder of the Muhammad Ali Center. She's dedicated her life to lifting up Muhammad's legacy and ensuring that compassion and conviction go hand in hand. Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstad, I practiced, one of the world's leading researchers on social connection and health. Her groundbreaking research has shown us that loneliness isn't just sad, it's dangerous and a serious risk factor as much as smoking about 14 cigarettes a day, all right? Dr. Sarah Conrath, a social psychologist whose work explores the psychological roots of compassion and generosity. She's studied everything from how we teach empathy to the surprising science behind selfless acts. Before we jump in, I'd like to play a short video that'll kind of guide our time today.
Good morning and welcome to the launch of the Muhammad Ali Index.
Right here is a beacon of hope.
It's an incredible gift to our nation to show and share where we are as it relates to compassion.
There was a 4,000% increase in the search for compassion. People have a hunger for compassion.
With the right tools, every single person can do something right now. The Muhammad Ali Index is that tool.
As fellow conspirators, politicians, activists, athletes, artists, we've got an incredible opportunity to introduce new programs, curricula rooted in the power of compassion.
A lot of people think compassion is soft. Really? I say, well, then try it.
It might be weird to say we're having a compassion conversation. What's the dude from Forbes doing here?
You have a guy from Forbes here. You have a girl from Fox News here. Compassion is not only good for your heart, but it's also good for your wallet. You have to make the economic case constantly for compassion.
As a company, you can't just be giving people enough to live by if you aren't also giving them something to live for.
Yeah.
Together, let's translate compassion into action.
We want this work to be impactful Let us be committed. Let us be connected. Let us be partners.
Muhammad Ali used his power to make a difference. We can too.
Thank you. First, we have to exhibit self-compassion daily. You have to take care of yourself. Second is to flex that compassion muscle every day. Every day when you get up, make it intentional. I don't care if you go in and say good morning to your coworkers, lift them up, bring them a cup of coffee, say something nice like that. but it's important. It's important.
Amen. That's what that.
Oh, okay. That's right. I should have known that. But it's important that you start with you, but you take it outward and make it an act, an intentional act every day with someone. Pretty soon it will become habitual. It'll become part of your daily routine. And it will become as easy as breathing as it was for my husband. Every day of his life, he did intentional, compassionate acts, spontaneous. And you can be spontaneous. Let somebody in traffic, you know? You know how you get the road rage? Let somebody in. Give somebody a hug. Somebody gave me a hug this morning, and hugs feel good. So just show that act of compassion. Care about people. Show up for people. Be present for them.
Julianne, same question to you.
Yeah. So earlier, Frederick, and I
Just
do
for-
that just for your mother.
Just do that for my mother, but it's fine. Yeah.
When you were saying how we each bring a different perspective, you know, from the personal to advocacy to research, and I was like, oh, well, which one of those am I, right?
All of them.
Because we all wear many hats, right? We all occupy many roles, and so, as you'll notice, I'll often put on the hat of the nerdy scientist, but I also come from these other perspectives, and advocacy has been incredibly important for me. Because science, if it gets stuck in academia, is never going to have real-world impact. But of course, this is also deeply personal. So I want to share a couple of examples that I think really get at that answer, or get at the question. And the first is a very deeply personal one. So in 2011, my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 Burkitt's lymphoma, an extremely rare and extremely aggressive cancer. And at the time, my kids were 4 and 8. And you can imagine, I'm trying, my world is imploding, right? And I was blown away by the incredible outpouring of compassion towards my family, towards my husband, towards me. And from coworkers, donating vacation time to neighbors bringing food literally every day for 4 months, to you name it. People just, there was such an outpouring. And I remember at a point feeling like I don't want to be a burden to other people, and people asking what I needed and not feeling like I could either ask for what I needed or even accept what was being offered to me. And I distinctly remember a very good friend of mine saying, if we are dying to do something and we feel helpless, please let us do this for you. Yeah. And this was a real eye-opener because I had been studying social support for over a decade at this point. And it was an eye-opener for what are the barriers for asking for support, what are the barriers for accepting support, and recognizing that by not accepting that I wasn't giving others the opportunity to express that compassion. And as we'll talk about, there's incredible benefits to that, and I was denying them these benefits. And so this has had an incredible impact on me professionally. Now I want to share another example, and that is the example of Jo Cox. For those of you who may not be familiar with her, she is a UK MP who was deeply compassionate about belonging in community, and particularly for those who are most vulnerable. And she, unfortunately, but tragically, was brutally murdered by a extremist. But her cause and her compassion led to the creation of the Joe Cox Foundation that ultimately was influential in establishing the first Minister for Loneliness, that also there was the first establishment of a national strategy for loneliness. And this also became somewhat of a catalyst to many global efforts. And so my point in sharing both of those examples is how powerful one individual can be. From the deep interpersonal kinds of interactions that you have with not only realizing that we occupy spheres of influence. And many of you, I know, are in potential opportunities of leadership or in positions of spheres of influence within your own communities. And you never know how that could have such a cascading effect. And so the power of an individual cannot be underestimated.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Sarah?
Both very inspirational. And you asked us, like, where do we see the most impact in compassion? And Lonnie said, we have to have compassion for ourselves. We really do. And then you gave a story of whether you could receive compassion. Can you receive compassion from the people around you? And what happens to them when they give? So I think there's impact in those in actually being willing to receive love from others, and in giving other people the chance to experience the joy of giving. And that sounds, I'm a scientist, so that sounds like joy of giving, like what are we talking about? But there's some good data that shows that when we give, if I could say, imagine there's a pill, if you take it, you're going to be happier, you're going to be more connected to people, you're going to be healthier, you're going to have like over 25%, maybe up to 50% less chance of dying. Like, who's signing up for that? Oh, it's free too, by the way. So, that's this relational piece of like, we can give, but we need to be in communities where we feel comfortable receiving, and we want the people around us to experience that joy of giving. And you also talked about the bigger picture too, of like what can we do like in a broader way in our society. And I believe we do need to have impact at all those levels. We need compassion in our schools. Mm-hmm. We need to support teachers to build compassion. They're already very compassionate. We need compassion in healthcare. We need compassion in our neighborhoods. And we need compassion in our political sphere, too.
Wow. Lonnie, just a question for you, because I felt particularly honored to be part of some of the interviews with the researchers for the Compassion Index, and I was able to join you in New York in January for the launch. And as you think about the research and the findings, how's the Muhammad Ali Center using the data to shift culture or drive programs?
Well, what we've done is from the Muhammad Ali Index, from the data that we have reviewed and studied, we're taking that data. It was, as you know, or in case you all don't know, there were 12 pilot cities that these surveys and that were looked at across the nation, very diverse cities. And we're taking that data that was derived from those cities and the respondents in those cities and looking at it very carefully as how we can help those cities activate some of the recommendations that have come from us, from the report. How we can engage with them, not tell them what to do, but how we can engage with them in their particular communities, addressing some of their particular issues, and how to make a more compassionate community, more compassionate society. And we feel like that is an opportunity for us to help them and to help the communities build that compassion component back into their societies. There are several recommendations that have come with the report, all of them doable, but we understand that people need help in activating, and so we have turned our attention from the report, which is a snapshot in time, to actually engaging with those cities and activating on those recommendations.
What surprised you about the findings?
You know what? I mean, all of us feel it. It's not a surprise, but 61% of the respondents said that they can tell They feel that there has been a lack of compassion in this country for over 5 years. And I think it's not that I didn't consider that there might be a decline, it's the amount of the people that said that. Where so much so where we have become so polarized in our rhetoric and our thinking that almost half of them said that they would never consider dating somebody who did not think like they did politically, you know? And I just found that interesting. Another thing I found interesting is that even though that's true, that 61% of people feel that way, as I said in that film, there's been a 4,000% increase in compassion content searches online over the past 4 years. So people want this. They want to feel that compassion. They want to lower that rhetoric, that heat on that rhetoric, and for people to work together and to be compassionate toward one another. And that 1 in 3 Americans feel that compassion is part of the American dream. You know, it's the way we were built, to help one another, to be there for one another. It's how this country got, this experiment called America, got to be where we are today. So I found those surprising. And also let me add this too. Some of what Julianne and Sarah were talking about that I found surprising. For the people who exhibit the most loneliness and feel lack of compassion, women I could understand a little bit because women always give. We're caregivers naturally, I feel that way. But it was the Gen Zers and the millennials who are experiencing this high level of loneliness and lack of compassion in their lives. And I just found that interesting that people so young would feel that way. And there's a variety of reasons that are listed in the report, but I just found that interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that in some later questions. I want to talk about young people, but how we can model and teach and kind of activate them, because it's what they learn now that'll predict the future. Julianne, you know, I believe that loneliness isn't just an individual struggle. It's a social and structural issue that demands a lot of different collective solutions. Your research has shown that the real health risk of chronic disconnection, what would it look like to treat social connection as a central infrastructure in our communities?
So first off, I couldn't agree more that this is not just an individual issue. And, you know, it's interesting because there has been so much focus on loneliness that it understandably gets viewed as an individual issue because, of course, when you feel lonely, that's a deeply personal feeling. But I want to emphasize that loneliness is just the symptom. The real issue is social disconnection.
Yeah.
And we can be disconnected in a variety of ways, but loneliness is the signal that our social needs are not being met, just like hunger signals us that our nutritional needs aren't being met, right? And so from that standpoint, we don't necessarily want to get rid of loneliness, and loneliness isn't necessarily the problem, but that actually the problem is that we lack social connection. And so, interestingly, I also love the fact that we're flipping it towards compassion and social connection because we don't just not want to, like, not feeling lonely is not the same as feeling connected. And that's a big difference, and we need to focus on that positive. And social connection is a fundamental human need. Humans are fundamentally a social species, and we see across all social species that this is a fundamental need essential for survival. If you're outside of a group, you are far more vulnerable. You have to meet the demands of everyday life on your own. And we have very good evidence that it is not only essential for survival, but when you lack it, it's an independent risk factor for premature mortality. But so now what would that mean to treat it as something as essential as infrastructure, right? And so when we think of infrastructure, we think of things like roads and buildings and, you know, water systems and the things that help societies function. And importantly, what we know across multiple scientific disciplines is that there are 3 core elements to social connection. there's the structure, function, and quality. And so if we use the example of a road, right? We need the existence of roads, right? And then the functions. What do roads do? They help us get from point A to point B. And then, as we all know, some roads are better quality than others. And, your dirt road, your bumpy road versus a smooth road. Well, when it comes to our relationships, we need the existence of our relationships. We need people in our lives. We need people in regular interaction. We need a variety of relationships. But there's these important functions that our relationships serve. And not all relationships are entirely positive. So we also need to pay attention to quality. But when it comes to infrastructure, there is actual resources behind this to build them, to maintain them. And so we don't have those kinds of resources devoted to something that is critical to the functioning, not only of individuals, but the functioning of our communities and the functioning of our society. But we can also think about literal infrastructure in terms of how it supports social connection. So we know that the built environment, so not only transportation helps us get out into our community, get to connect with other people. Housing is important. Churches, libraries, parks, these are all the places and spaces that we engage and are able to build and maintain relationships with each other. And so we do need to invest in these because the more that we have barriers in our communities that prevent us from being connected, this is only contributing to the problem. And so oftentimes we are trying to come up with really complicated programs that are often quite costly to fix a problem when it's become severe. Oftentimes if we can get there through preventing and removing barriers and allowing this to happen naturally is going to be really important. So building and investing in that as an essential part of the functioning of humans and our communities is going to be really critical.
So just maybe a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you're writing a prescription, like how does compassion fit into there?
Great question.
Yeah.
So we know we have very good evidence of the health effects of this, and just if you want a good summary of all of the evidence, so I was the lead scientific editor on the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory, and so there's a good summary of all of the health effects of this. But I want to, just because many people don't recognize the health implications of this, also help recognize that not only has this been recognized in the US, but next week, the World Health Organization will be releasing a commission report on connection as a public health priority. And the American Heart Association has recognized this as an important health issue. And so we know that this impacts our health. So how do we come up with a prescription? Well, we know also that when we integrate this into clinical care, some of my research has shown that this is associated with a 20% increased odds of survival and 29% increased length of life. But we also have a movement of social prescription.
Yeah.
And this is how the healthcare system can, in a way, just like you might prescribe a medication, a pill, right? You can prescribe to a patient something in their community that they might need, whether that be resources or a program or the arts, that these are all ways to connect people to the needs that they might have.
Yeah.
Another amen.
Another amen.
Thank you. Sarah, I want a question about, we talked earlier about modeling or teaching or training. How do we model for young people or other people, what it means to show up with people, how to respond with care in a world with fragmented attention, right? The digital overload. What would you say is the way to do that today?
I think there's not one way.
Yeah.
There are so many ways.
Well, give me a
and
couple of them.
I will. But it's like
Yeah.
the limits of our imagination.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, the one that comes to mind right away is just listening.
Yeah.
And it's not listening like just, to the words people say, but it's deep, like observation, like paying attention to all the little things that people are sharing with their body, their tone of voice, all of that. And in order to do that, you just have to be there with people. Be willing to sit there with people, even people you don't know. Like Fred, you mentioned a very moving story this morning at breakfast. I would love to hear you share it, but that was an example of how to show up for people and how to be empathetic. And then, I love that little sweet dog. We can grow our empathy through interactions with beings who can't speak because it teaches us to tune in. It could be babies or it could be beautiful animals, but just paying attention to them. I think.
He heard you talking about him.
I planned that,
Yeah.
just so you know. I have like a treat somewhere hidden here. But no, really, it really does, it helps. But I think one of the things is there's resistance and barriers because a lot of us are kind of overwhelmed or exhausted or experiencing fatigue or concern that maybe somebody will take too much if we give. And there's research showing that when given a chance to empathize with others, 60% of people will say no thanks. So there is a barrier, and if we're honest, we can recognize that in ourselves sometimes. If we're tired or hungry or just overwhelmed with what's going on in the world. So we have to first overcome that barrier. And what I say to that is, if you want to grow your compassion, find the thing that actually you like. It's like exercise, right? Like I love to bike, so I get on the bike every day. It doesn't take any motivation because I like it. I don't want to do weights though. I'm working on it. But so pick the thing you actually love. There's so many ways. There's interacting with dogs and babies, and you can watch movies or theater. You can take an improv class. You can do meditation. There's a whole many ways. Simple like this way that costs nothing and takes 1 second is simply stop for a moment and imagine what the person next to you is feeling and thinking and experiencing. That actually is the biggest, in the research, that's like the one that has the biggest effect and is the easiest to do. But I think there's so many ways.
What about like younger generations, Gen Z, for example? Folks say that younger generations are less empathetic. Do that method support that group, or are we missing the ways that younger generations show care or express it to others?
That's a great question. I think that brings me back to Lonnie's finding that there was 61% of people believe Americans are declining in compassion.
In compassion. But as far as loneliness, it's Gen Zers and millennials that really kind of stood out, that
Right.
these young people are experiencing this. Of course, we all know that part of it is because they got their face in a phone, right? And this is one of the things that Juliana said about the parks and the spaces of having kids and people interact and meet one another and talk and have discourse in these kinds of areas. And it's, Sarah said, the activity, having that area for them to have that kind of activity and be together.
And I'll just confirm that in addition to your report, we have evidence across lots of studies, and including a study that I was involved with that had data from 142 different countries.
Wow.
And again, it's the youth, the Gen Z, that are showing the highest levels of loneliness.
Yeah, so you're finding that Americans believe that compassion is declining. So let's see what we think here in this room. How many of you believe that compassion is declining in the US? Okay, well, you're in for something because I actually literally study this. I track changes over time in both the feeling of compassion or the trait of care for others and cognitive empathy, which is that imagination piece that I talked about. So what we found is since the 70s, the late 70s, young Americans declined in empathy until 2008. Everyone's like, see, I'm right. Okay, you were right until then. But we had this shocking finding that since 2008, we just released this paper, but since 2008, there was a dramatic increase. So here we have now people who are rising in compassion, but believe that other people around them are not compassionate. Now, if you're good, but believe others around you are not good, are you gonna wanna hang out with them? And what's going to happen if you don't want to hang out with them?
Sarah, let me ask you, you said since 2008, but what about over the last 5 or 6 years? Do
We
you have studies on that?
The most available data we have is up to 2018, but we continue to track it, and we're seeing a lot of signs that young people are actually very engaged, very compassionate, and motivated to care. But the barrier is that they have low trust in others. They don't believe that other people care, and they look around them and they're gathering that information. But I believe that we need to show them
Yeah.
that other people care.
Now, does that stop them from caring because of the lack of trust? Right now, 71% of Americans have decided they don't trust their neighbors, right? And so if you don't trust, you go inside. If you go inside, you're lonely and you're isolated. But how does that equate to them with compassion and showing the care?
I think that compassion needs an action. So when you feel compassion, you want to act. And I think it can be a barrier, but I still see young people caring in ways that we might not count.
Yeah.
Right? For example, we see them online sharing views about causes they really care about, people they've never met but they care about around the world. And I think that can be an inspiration to us. This is probably the most involved generation I've seen. They really do care and they're really involved. And I think we need to stop being the barrier to young people. And in fact, even our idea of that screens are stopping them from caring. If we look at research and we track young people who use more social media, well, I've been around the block and I know we believe social media, probably, many of you probably believe that it's causing declines in empathy in young people. But if you actually track the young people who are using social media, those are the most connected kids. And those are the ones, when you track them over time, who are growing the most in their empathy. And I think it's just because they're able to see people from other environments. Many of us live in these segregated environments, with people who are just like us, and we don't get to see others. And social media is this window. And it's not all good, it's not all bad, but it does seem to help activate empathy in young people.
Can I push you just a little bit?
Yeah, please.
Because the most digitally connected generation, but as Lonnie indicated, but the most lonely and the most untrusting. And so I understand the empathy, but it doesn't trend to where it creates something positive. And so I wonder, how do we?
Yeah, I think I've noticed that too. That is, it's like, but I think we are noticing that as loneliness rises, so is empathy. And we think it's about what Julianne was saying, that empathy, or that loneliness is this social, it's a hunger.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that you need to connect. So as young people are lonely, they're also realizing there's this hunger for connection. They're probably seeing other friends and peers and people around them who are lonely, and they're feeling compassion. So it's like this circle. It's not what we think. I think it's easier to be like, well, if you're empathetic, you're not going to be lonely. But no, I think it's like you feel this hunger and you want to connect, and maybe that desire to connect is what's going to help us, is just getting out there.
So that's perfect. Lonnie, I want to ask you another question before I make time for the audience. But you've often talked about Muhammad's deep empathy and the way he showed care for people. He saw it as a responsibility. And so I think what's missing in the conversation is the responsibility to care for your neighbor or show up for people, essentially. And so how did he come to that? He was responsible for folks and it wasn't just a virtue.
Muhammad was a very rare character. Muhammad was born like that. Like I said, I've known him since I was 6, and he was 22, and the man's been like that ever since I've known him. I mean, it's just what he was. It was part of his DNA, and he enjoyed it. He found pleasure in it. He got energy from it, and he felt it was, you said it, not just a responsibility, but it was a joy for him to be able to connect with people. And one of the things that Sarah was talking about with millennials and Gen Zers, where they build community online, but it's about building community in person, me being face to face. And Muhammad was the kind, you could spend 10 seconds with him, you could spend 10 hours with him, you could spend 10 days with him, but you all would have that unique experience that you were the center of his attention and his universe in that amount of time. He made you feel special. He let you know, no matter how much time he had with you, that he cared about you, deeply cared about you, and he was interested in who you were. That's a rare ability to do it. I try to do it every day, but it's hard. But it was so natural for him. As natural, as I said, as breathing. He was just exceptional. But it's my hope, my dream, my aspiration to be able to be more like that. I try every day. And hopefully with that and what we do at the work at the center, I can inspire others to try to be the same way. Wow. And if you want to know how Muhammad connected, that was prior to social media. So he did this one person at a time.
Wow.
But he traveled the world, and wherever he sat his feet, he was home. That was his family. Those were his people. You know, that's just the way he was. And you talk about proof of concept. If any of you all saw his memorial service that lasted not a day, but a week, and all the people who came from all around the world, people he had never met, that was because Muhammad had that compassionate heart, and it spread like ink all over.
Wow. Sarah and Julianne, I'm going to get back to you, but I want to figure out how do you model that or teach that, or is there some training we can create? Because we have to figure out how to replicate. As Beyonce says, he just woke up like this. He just woke up like that. Right? So I'm wondering if there's questions in the audience. I'll go to you first.
Lonnie,
there's a young lady over here, too.
I watched the memorial service where Billy Crystal talked about he wasn't able to run around a particular country club, and Muhammad took him aside and said, "Little brother, I'm not going to run around that club anymore." There was that solidarity that seemed to be. And so when we talk about empathy and how it comes natural, maybe through suffering, shared suffering, could you say more in your experience looking at the index of what are the blocks that keep people from that experience of empathy? Is it childhood, the way that we're raised? What have you learned in the science or in the work of the Compassion Index?
Well, the Compassion Index did not go specifically into that. It did talk about, when I talk about Gen Zers, millennials, and women, it was loneliness, it was lack of not feeling they were worthy, they didn't have enough time for self-care and compassion for themselves. It was about comparing themselves with other people. But probably the best person to answer that would probably be Julianne with regards to what are the blocks, the barriers to that.
So some of the barriers can be individual, and some can be internal or external. And so what we have evidence of from in terms of loneliness is that oftentimes when we are isolated, it creates a sense of defensiveness because we're now in a state where we can't depend upon others. And so we can also tend to then be more distrustful of others. And this leads to something called a negative cognitive bias, where we tend to interpret others' actions that might even be ambiguous or neutral as negative. And so when we respond to others if we assume others are unfriendly, untrustworthy, we may behave towards them in an unfriendly way, which then only reinforces that and can reinforce that loneliness. And so in some point, we may have a hard time with compassion if we're distrustful of others. But we also need to recognize that there are many barriers in society, whether that be the physical barriers of not being able to get around. I'll never forget a patient that who was talking about how she was so isolated, so lonely, and someone had recommended that she, get involved in her community and do all these programs, and they were not aware of the fact that she lived in a very crime-ridden area, high violence, and she didn't feel safe. And so we have to pay attention to the kinds of external barriers that are out there. And I think one of
Yeah, that's perfect. I want to make sure we can get to a couple more questions before we have to call it. So sorry about that. The young lady there in the front row.
Thank you so much. Deepest gratitude to each and every one of you for this powerful conversation. And Fred, thank you for calling me young. I'm going to so your big check is...
My mom is listening.
Your mom has raised you well. My name's Mo. I'm a paediatrician from the UK, so I'm speaking from a UK perspective. And I'm all in for compassion. I've literally seen it save lives. And my question relates to how we can systematize this, specific to healthcare, because there's a dissonance between what we know and the wealth of academia. We have Professor Michael West in the UK, who has a wealth of academic research about compassion. But the lived experience for those of us on the clinical front line is often very different. We have leaders who are narcissistic and bullies, and that's promoted as leadership potential. And so we see that play out at scale. And I can speak for myself personally, and
Hey, Mo, really quick. So hold on. I want to give her a chance to answer the question. So
the question is, we can measure compassion. Why can't we just recruit leaders for compassion? Because it's so harmful when we know what compassion does in healthcare, and yet that's not the lived expertise or experience of those in leadership, and that's not what we see on a daily basis.
So can I repeat your question? We can measure compassion, so why can't we start recruiting people who are compassionate?
To lead.
That's the answer to me, but...
And rewarding compassion at a leadership level.
Yes.
I'll also just mention a couple things that are happening in terms of the medical system. So at least in the US, we now have various indicators that now are available in the electronic health record. And so that it's available in Epic. It's an option, so many people may not be aware that it's there. And then also, I'll just share, there's a framework that some colleagues and I have published in the New England Journal of Medicine that gives a framework for how healthcare providers can address this in the clinic.
Perfect. There's the right there. Yep. Wave your hand. Yep. Right there. I think that's our last one, but quick. It has to be quick.
Hi. Thank you so much, Caitlin, fellow millennial. I'm curious about the case of empathetic response being a burden and leading to burnout. Is there a case for empathy, or should we be rewriting the code and moving our empathetic response into compassionate action?
That's a great question. We have a paper that hasn't come out yet, so sneak preview. We are asking the same question about empathy and burnout, and we're getting all the studies we can find together into one paper. And what we're finding is the relationship between empathy and burnout depends upon the type of empathy. So if you think empathy is feeling what others are feeling, especially if you're a clinical practitioner, yeah, there's a high risk for burnout there. But as you pointed out, like if you are practicing empathy, that you can sit compassionately with people, their feelings aren't necessarily going to be the same as your feelings, but you can sit with their distress and you can imagine it and just be there for them. That's actually associated with lower burnout. So I think that clinically, the training for empathy needs to be really thoughtful about how do we regulate our emotions when we're interacting with people in distress, and how do we show them that we're there and show up the way Muhammad showed up, be fully present with people, while also being able to stay calm in ourselves and be able to stay centered. And that, I think that does take specialized training.
Perfect. Yeah. So I want to make sure we end on time. It's kind of one of my gifts. I like to start. So,
you have many.
Excited. This conversation wasn't about policy, but it was about people. And if everyone in this room wanted to do something or leave with something today, how they can lead with compassion in their own circles, what's something small or big or meaningful action that they can do this week? Lonnie, I'll go to you first.
First thing I would say, besides practicing self-compassion, is how many of you all know all of your neighbors? Oh, that's surprising.
Ask them how many will borrow sugar from their neighbor. That's and most of them are going to lie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I would suggest you get to know your neighbors. Make that part of your family, your community, those neighbors. I have to confess, the first neighborhood I lived in Louisville with Muhammad, I didn't know them. I think they were afraid to know us. But the one that I live in now, it's a real neighborhood like I grew up in. So get to know your neighbors. The second thing I would tell you, if I can borrow a little bit of time, is for everyone to download this report at aliindex.org. You can read through it, but please go all the way through it to the back and sign the compassion pledge. Because once you sign that pledge, it sort of is in your mind, I got to do something, right? Because as she said, empathy is about the feeling, compassion is about the action.
Wow. Wow. Julianne?
So I want to build on what you just said. And so interestingly, I did a large multi-country randomized control trial of doing small acts of kindness. And what we found across thousands of people, those who were randomized to this kind challenge, was they were asked to just do some kind of small act of service for a neighbor. And what we found was that when they did this, they were not only less lonely, they were more likely to know at least 6 of their neighbors. There was less neighborhood conflict, and in some countries associated with lower rates of depression and other indicators. The reason I bring this up is because this is something so small that literally any one of us can do. And interestingly, we did not measure the benefit of the person on the receiving end. It was the benefit to the person doing it. And so this is something that each one of you can do that is so small and can yet make such a big difference.
Yeah, totally. Sarah?
I can be so quick. I'm just going to build. We said the word neighbor a few times here. You're sitting in a room right now. You have a neighbor. Find someone you don't know when we're done today, okay? You came with someone. Find someone you don't know. And just practice some of this. Take a few minutes. It's worth it. Meet a new person, find a new neighbor. And practice compassion and channel Muhammad and just be fully there with the person. I hope you can do that.
Wow. I want to personally thank the 3 of you for this really insightful conversation and for going on this journey with us today.
Thank you, Fred.
At Weave, and you'll hear David Brooks, our founder, who will talk about this often, that our greatest untapped resource in our country, it isn't money or innovation, but it is really everyday people sharing humanity together, just seeing each other as the same as us and showing up for each other. It is as simple as saying hello to a neighbor, making eye contact. It's as easy as having coffee with somebody that you don't know, and it's as easy as sitting with a grieving family. These are all emotions that we all share, but if we're really gonna dispel the data and move our country forward and get reconnected and end loneliness and isolation, it's going to take each and every one of us modeling the behavior to the generations that you all are complaining about. I want to add that, and showing up in a different way, because these things that our younger generations lack is because we haven't shown them. So as you leave here today, make your complaints about society as large as your commitments to building community together. Thank you for your time.